Welcome to the Screenplay Lab. I'm your host, Jeff Barker. I'm a screenwriter, and this is a podcast where we study and appreciate the standalone beauty of the screenplay as an independent literary piece, not just a blueprint for the film. We take one screenplay, we break it down, we deconstruct it, we find out what's unique about it, what we love about it, and most of all, what we can learn from it. And this week, episode 16, we're diving deep into Hereditary by Ari Aster. This is a 2018 slow burn, psychological, elevated horror about grief, generational trauma, mental illness. This is a screenplay that has had a huge impact on the horror genre. In fact, some people credit him with inventing a whole new genre with this screenplay, this elevated prestige horror that digs deep into psychological traumas and themes rather than just relying on jump scares and regular horror tropes. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of film students who will say I'm completely wrong about that, so don't come at me about it. I don't know. But I will say this screenplay, whether you like it or not, has had a huge impact on modern day horror. So let's meet Ari Aster, 38 years old, screenwriter from New York City. Comes from a family of artists like so many of our screenwriters and directors do. His mother was a poet. His father was a musician. He spent quite a bit of his childhood in New Mexico and some of it in England. He went to college at College of Santa Fe in New Mexico. Then he went to grad school, film school at AFI, the American Film Institute. And while he was in film school and even after film school, he was making a lot of short films. He made at least 8 of these provocative short films that became his calling card all over town, including one in 2011 called The Strange Thing About the Johnsons. And this was a story about family dysfunction and abuse. And it got people thinking, well, I think this guy could handle a feature film. Also in 2011, he did the short film Beau, which was the prototype for his feature film Beau is Afraid with Joaquin Phoenix. That was his third feature film, but it started out as a short, and we'll talk more about that later. But the most important thing to know about Ari Aster, if you only could know one thing, is that he is a writer and director who specializes in grief and trauma and guilt and death, family dysfunction, things that truly make us think about ourselves and our own lives. And he does this through the vehicle of horror, mostly occult. But he is a drama-first storyteller. And this is what I was talking about earlier, saying that he has pushed the horror genre in this direction. Now there are several horror filmmakers who are doing exactly what he's doing and having huge success with it. When he talks about his stories, he says the horror emerges organically from the emotional breakdown itself. His famous quote actually is, "I write drama that gets hijacked by horror." And you could feel that. You could see it on the page. You could see it on the screen. But he is never afraid to push the envelope, push the boundaries, put us in uncomfortable situations, not only visually, but also psychologically ourselves, thinking about things that you may not want to be thinking about. You have Jennifer Kent, you have Robert Eggers, you have Jordan Peele, and many others who are doing this, but using this horror vehicle to tell an emotionally, philosophical, relevant story rather than just jump scares. It is what horror is today for most of us. So what about him? He is very private. We don't know much about him at all. Even when he is promoting a film, he doesn't really answer questions about himself. He pushes that away. He has said over time that he has experienced a lot of grief and pain and trauma from family trauma that's been passed down through his family. And you see that in all of his films. Also, he says he struggles with anxiety and OCD tendencies, which show up in a lot of his characters. So he is, as you could tell, one of my favorites. I respect him so much. And he's a very controversial screenwriter, filmmaker, because some people don't like his stuff at all. But that's why it's art. And we all can decide what it means to us and what we find out about it that is revealing something about ourselves. But for me and my family, he's the man. And he started with feature films in 2018, and Hereditary was his very first. That's the one we're going to be breaking down today. Then he followed that up in 2019 with Midsommar, starring Florence Pugh. This is my favorite of his collection. I call it the daylight horror because the whole thing is bright and beautiful. And of course, it's about this young woman, and she's coping with the loss of her sister and her parents as she attends a pagan festival. And then in 2023, he finally got to make Beau is Afraid, starring Joaquin Phoenix. And this is a surreal story about an anxious man who's on a journey to visit his mother. And then, why this is so relevant, in a couple of weeks here, July 18th of this year, Eddington will be hitting the theaters. And it is a COVID-19 Western horror. So maybe he just made up a whole other genre. No one's ever heard of that before. But it has an all-star cast, including Joaquin Phoenix, Pedro Pascal, Emma Stone, Austin Butler, Luke Grimes, and many more. It's going to be something to see. There's been a lot of mixed reviews about it for the people who got to see early screenings, but you can expect that with a film that's playing a political line here. We're already 50-50 split before you even have an opinion about the movie. But today we're talking about Hereditary, his very first feature film. And so how was the screenplay written and developed? He says Hereditary was born from a very personal place. These ideas of trying to control grief, guilt over things that cannot be undone, emotional inheritance of trauma and pain. He had several unproduced feature screenplays at the time when he started writing this back in 2014. His favorite of the group was Beau is Afraid, but he had a hard time getting anyone to take it seriously or even consider making it, mostly because producers said it was too risky, it didn't have a true genre, and they were calling it the Jewish Lord of the Rings, which actually makes sense. So remember, at the time, he had also not made a feature film, so he was unproven. So he put Beau is Afraid back on the shelf, hoping that he would get back to it, and he started on Hereditary 2014. And at first, this was not a horror movie, believe it or not. It was a domestic tragedy only, with pretty much the same storyline, but without the horror. And in fact, the original title was The Mourning Family. Mourning as in Mourning, mourning. Aster says he was happy with his screenplay, but he felt like it could be so much better. And without even wanting to, he says that the horror just poured out and it made the story complete. It was a way to externalize so that we could all experience this internal collapse that was going on with the characters. He spent a lot of time researching occult lore, especially the Demon King Payman. And then A24 read a draft of the script in 2016 and greenlit the project. And obviously, this guy's an amazing talent. But remember, again, he was a first-time feature director. And they said, all right, we got your back. Let's do this. Let's go for it. And he says he spent his final few drafts of the screenplay before he locked it in, trying to slow it down. He wanted to front-load the emotional horror and save the supernatural for the last possible moments. And that's what he did, making the ending of this inevitable, but not surprising. Something that we always saw coming, but we didn't want to see. So it was produced by A24 along with Palm Star. They financed it. Lars Knudsen was a producer on the film, and he's a big time producer. He also works with Robert Eggers, so you can see his taste here. Principal photography took place over 32 days in 2017 in Utah, around Salt Lake City and Park City. A budget of $10 million, which is a modest budget, but a very high budget for a first-time screenwriter-director, especially in horror. All interiors of the house were shot on a custom-built set to allow for specific camera movements, so they'd have a lot of space to do whatever they wanted to do. Aster wanted the house to feel like a miniature dollhouse, which is one of the themes of the screenplay, which is fascinating that both A24 movies, Hereditary and Heretic, have miniatures in them. I don't know why that's interesting, other than they both start with an H and they're both A24 movies. So after they had everything in the can and they got back to start editing and they put a cut together, the original cut was huge. It went on and on and on. This slow burn movie, never really getting to the main point. And so he had to work very closely with his editor to do some hard things and kill the darlings, as they say. Cut it down. They fine-tuned the pacing so that it fit what we all expect when we sit down to watch a movie. this emotional buildup and then this payoff. And so they got it there. Still a rather long film, over 2 hours for a horror movie, but it works, especially with the pacing of the storytelling. Another thing that they did during editing is they took out a lot of extra beats of horror in the third act. Believe it or not, it was even worse. And maybe there's a director's cut. I don't know. After all these years, I wouldn't be surprised if there is. I don't know that, though. But they did take out a lot of those horror beats so that it just wasn't so overwhelming and didn't come out as an over-the-top horror, to this family drama. Then it premiered at Sundance in January 2018 and then worldwide that summer in June. Major acclaim, seen as one of the most disturbing horror films in years. And that really set this film on fire, set Ari Aster on fire, and it made $82 million at the box office off of a $10 million get. And the world has changed a lot since 2018, call back to COVID. And one thing to consider is Toni Collette's performance in this movie, this amazing Oscar-worthy performance. Had this happened now, had this film came out today, there's no doubt in my mind that she would be nominated for an Oscar. Back then, it was off the table for a horror movie. Now, though, the Academy has softened a bit, I say, not completely, but they are considering horror movies, especially prestige and elevated horror movies, to kind of be in the club a little bit. And her performance, though, is just so great. And it's commonly accepted that she deserved to be an Oscar nominee for this performance. All right, so here we go with Hereditary, and the official logline of this screenplay is: when the matriarch of the Graham family passes away, her daughter and grandchildren begin to unravel cryptic and increasingly terrifying secrets about the ancestry, trying to outrun the sinister fate they seem to have inherited. Okay, I always like to try a logline, so here's mine. When a grandmother dies, her family begins to spiral, discovering that the horrors they face are not just inherited. Screenplay Statistics, it is 118 pages, 156 scenes. Runtime of the film theatrically, 2 hours and 7 minutes. That's 1 minute and 4 seconds per page and 1.3 scenes per page. And the often overlooked part of creating a screenplay is the title of the film. Always significant to try to come up with a title that has multiple meanings and sort of ties in the themes of your screenplay. And so we try to break them down here and see what we can figure out. I found 3 meanings to the title of this screenplay / movie, Hereditary. First is the inherited trauma of mental illness. The most immediate here, the psychological, emotional trauma passed down through generations. Annie talks about her family history of mental illness, her father's starving himself, her brother's suicide, her mother's manipulation. And the second meaning for the title is the supernatural inheritance, talking about the destiny of the occult, talking about King Payman, who is intended for this body, this vessel that's being prepared for him. And the third meaning would be the inheritance of our fate. The title hinting at illusions that we have some sort of power over our own destiny. Now we're getting into some deep philosophy here. And it alludes to the idea that her and her family are puppets in this already predestined fate. It is a fascinating thought exercise, dabbling into these ideas of nihilism. I wrote a whole screenplay about it. But it can be dangerous if you go too far down that rabbit hole and you start to come up with these ideas of if nothing matters, if everything's predetermined, then who cares? What's the point? And now to formatting, mechanics, and style. And this is where the screenwriter teaches us how to read their individual screenplay with their own signature styles. The first thing to look at here is character tags and how he changes the name of the character in the dialogue based on the information that we have about that character. This is something you see a lot in literature, where they hold back information and we discover it along with the characters. In screenwriting, for the most part, anytime someone shows up for the first time, we find out who they are exactly, maybe a little bit about them, and then that's their name throughout the screenplay. Mostly just so there's no confusion for the actors. But I like what he does here. In fact, I do this myself sometimes, where, especially if you don't have to go too long, if you can do it in the same scene, you can make it a little more interesting by giving us some information. And then all of a sudden, now we know the person by a different name, and we're going to use that name. Okay, here's what I'm talking about. Let's look at it, page 43. He's talking about a woman here. He's calling her older woman. An older woman is having a conversation with Annie, and you can see the character designations here: older woman, Annie, older woman, Annie. And then the question is asked, who are you? Or she finally introduces herself and she says, I'm Joan. Annie says hi, and then here she goes. Instead of older woman, she is now Joan. Annie Joan, Annie Joan. Another thing to look at is how he does sound design in the screenplay. Obviously, he has the all caps sound a few times, but he also describes it sort of in a literary way and puts it in parentheses. We can see an example of that here on page 81, where it says in parentheses, there is the faint sound of Max's barking, that's the dog, as if heard from a great distance. So rather than just having bark, bark, and then trying to designate that it's getting quieter, he puts it in here in parentheses and gives us the whole enchilada. Ari Aster uses many slugs in his screenplays, but only to designate time. So he doesn't do what you can do with mini slugs is once you've established a location and you move around in that location, you don't say that it's still interior or you don't say that it's still night. You just go from bedroom to bathroom to kitchen. He doesn't do that. He still establishes the scene with the more traditional slug heading, but if there's a time shift, he will show it. Here is an example on page 20 where it says interior Catholic school gymnasium night, then 30 minutes later, then 5 minutes later. He does this quite a bit, and if you've seen the film recently, you may remember that there are a lot of transitions in the film that depict time. They'll show the character doesn't move. It's sort of a faux time lapse, where it's day to night or night to day. The lighting changes, but it's obvious it's not a sped up camera or anything like that. But he also uses later, moments later, even seconds later. We see that in the screenplay. Time to talk about Whitespace, and he has some long, thick action lines. There are 39 paragraphs that are 7 or 8 lines each. 8 is his max, but there are quite a few of them in the screenplay. At the same time, there are a lot of one-line paragraphs, and that is because Ari Aster in his screenplays, he uses the paragraph as a beat, as a shot sequence. So it takes as long as it takes. If it takes 8 lines to describe what we're going to see in the scene, or especially if multiple things are going on, it's going to be a longer paragraph. If it's so-and-so got up and crossed the room, it's going to be 1 line. So let's look at it. A good example of that is to compare page 114 to page 35, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. On 114, we have these really thick paragraphs, but it's a lot of describing and explaining and setting things up and showing us what's going on, as opposed to page 35, where Peter is in the car and he's driving his sister, and you know what happens here. It's a pretty heady experience. But things are happening fast, so there's a lot. This happens, then this happens. So the paragraphs get smaller, smaller, smaller. And you can see how it plays out on the page here, where you have a lot of white space. It's easy to read. Your eyes go vertically down the page instead of horizontally across. So you could even take those longer paragraphs and break them up, but he's being very consistent about using the paragraph to describe a beat. And so it is what it is. It goes where it goes. And now we look at direction on the page, where we look at the screenwriters and how they choose to use or not use direction on the page. Last week we did challengers, and there was very little direction on the page. It was very cinematic writing where you could just visualize the shots with your mind. Ari Aster is more putting on his director's cap here, telling us what the shot's going to look like, what we're going to see in the shot, framing it up, even some of the editing. 56 times in the screenplay, we get a we are, we see, we follow. Probably more than that. I think I might have missed some, but it's quite a bit. You can see here on page 9091, through the foyer window, we see Steve and Dr. Stetson outside. Then on top of 91, we see Dr. Stetson saying, I'm sorry, I can't. But there are a lot of filming instructions. There's pans and drifts and moves and tracks and pushes and wides and booms, low angle, high angle, extreme high angle, and then ECU in abbreviations, which is extreme close-up. Page 37 gives us a really good example of both the we sees and also the camera direction. So let's look at this quick scene here on the page. Exterior cemetery day, an overcast day, a sad gathering of mourners. Annie, Peter, and Steve stand lost among them. Okay, pretty standard there. Then it says, we are at a distance. The coffin in profile is being lowered into the ground. We are booming down to follow the sinking casket, keeping it centered. So talking about where it needs to be on the screen. And as the coffin descends into the earth, we do too, or so do we, it says. We slowly creep down, losing sight of the cemetery and the mourners. We continue tracking down along the dirt and the earthworms and the weeds. I love this. Sinking deeper and deeper into the dark, wet soil. Soon we are swallowed up again in black. So he doesn't do it like he's writing some menu or some blueprint. He still makes it sound beautiful and cinematic, keeps you in the story. But it is very to the point of, this is how I see it in my head. I want you to see it that way too. So much so, I'm just going to draw it out for you right here. Another quick example here is on page 84, where we see at the end of one scene, and it says the composition of this shot, wide and high angle, is matched eerily to the cut to interior classroom next day. So this is also something to talk about. He does this a couple of times where he ties into the next scene header with the end of the previous action line. This is a voice and a style, and some screenwriters use this technique to tie continuity of scenes. Usually, though, it's a transition, like from one room to the next, or if someone's running and going from one space to the other. Here, if you'll look closely, you'll see that the bedroom and then the classroom, it says next day. So they're tying in a new scene, but it's more like a match cut. But rather than just say match cut, he's wanting to be more specific. Quick pause here to just say, if you're appreciating this podcast, I'm so very grateful for that. Thank you for spending your time with me. If you would, please like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Also, if you're listening to this podcast, you can see me on YouTube and see all the examples, and vice versa. Also, the best way to keep up with me is at my website, jeff-parker.com. But most of all, thank you for watching this podcast or listening to this podcast. And let's get back to it.
Thank you for watching my dad's podcast.
And now to the actual writing of the screenplay. And there is some very good writing in here. You can see why A24 was like, yeah, okay, this guy is very talented. He has all these shorts that have gotten a lot of buzz, and this screenplay is excellent. So let's give it a roll. Let's see how it goes. Ari Aster uses a lot of side comments and quotes in his action lines to clarify the thoughts. If you follow what I just said there, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. He'll clarify a look or a movement, and he wants to make sure there's no confusion about what's going on the page. Here's some examples of what I'm talking about. Page 13, they're in the classroom, and the classroom erupts with excitement. And then we have in the action line a quote, "Oh my God, did you see that?" These are not things that the students say. I mean, maybe they do say that as sort of extra noise in the background, but it's more of to show us this is how the people are reacting. On page 10, we have a conversation between Annie and Charlie, and without looking at Annie, Charlie shrugs a tense, "I don't know." So Ari Aster wants to make sure that we know what that shrug meant. So he puts it right there in quotes. On page 17, Annie is talking to Peter and Charlie, and she's wanting to know if any of them went into her mother's room. She asks, "Did either of you go into grandma's room recently?" And then the action line is, they both squint. "Why would we go in there?" In quotation marks. So he's making it very clear what that squint means. I counted over 90 times in the screenplay where he uses this technique to clarify what's going on in the action line. And if you go to Screenplay Reddit, they'll have a lot of opinions about this. And he has a thumbprint. All screenwriters do that thing that if you read them enough, you'll notice, oh, I know who wrote this. This is how they write. His is exclamation marks. They are abundant. If I was going to say someone had a lot of exclamation marks or exclamation points, is it marks or points? I don't remember. Exclamations in their screenplay, what would you say would be a lot? 10, 20, 50? How about 265 exclamations in this screenplay? Here on 48, we can see 7. Here's a page I just randomly picked. Page 56, there are 8 exclamations. I got really self-conscious there about exclamation point versus exclamation mark. I'll go with exclamation mark. Ari Aster is very minimalistic when it comes to his character introductions. We'll go back here to page 1, which, look at that. Page 1's got a lot of blocky text on it. But here he introduces Peter, and his description is handsome, skinny boy. And when he introduces the father, Steve, his characteristics that he uses to introduce him are tall, broad-shouldered, formal. So not a lot to it. Not big, flowy, beautiful descriptions of who they are as a person and what they mean to you. So he doesn't dig into the psyche of the character when describing them, just very simply, this is what they look like, this is what they're wearing, let's cast it. Another thing we can learn from Ari Aster in his screenwriting is how he creates tension with writing perspective. So it's not exactly what's happening, but from what perspective we're seeing it. We've already seen an example of this when that casket went into the ground, and it was very mechanical. So I wouldn't call it cinematic writing. It's more mechanical writing. But using that perspective, we're going to go into the ground with the coffin, and soon everything's going to be dark, is visual in our heads. And like, wow, I can picture that. Here's another example I'd like to share with you on page 16 and 17. And again, think about what we're studying here is not how to create tension with what's happening in the scene. I mean, you have to do that automatically, but how we're using POV and perspective to create even more tension. We pick it up. Annie steps out into the hall and walks past the doorway. A moment later, we hear her footsteps freeze. So this tells us by hearing her footsteps, we stayed back. We're not there. We're still in the room, we the viewer. She soon returns into view, now looking very unsettled, and she stares past us into the room. So you can clearly visualize this. She left, footsteps stopped, she came back, she's looking at us or past us over our shoulder. And then it goes on to Annie's POV, and it literally says, Annie's POV. And the room is mostly empty, save for the bed, stripped of sheets, a bookshelf, various framed photos featuring members of the family. One photo, a portrait of Annie and her mother standing side by side. There's also a large triangle pointed northwest that has been carved violently into the floorboards. So now when we have Annie's POV, and this is one of those larger paragraphs setting things up, it's saying, look at this room. It's pretty casual. You've got this and that and that. And then, oh yeah, there's also this weird thing carved in the floor. Obviously, you could craft this scene many different ways. The easiest way, the lowest hanging fruit, is just to be with Annie the whole time. Annie's, from her perspective, in the hallway. She's looking into the room. You would probably take away the footsteps because that's just a vehicle to show this perspective. She's just in the hallway hanging out, and she looks into the room. Tight shot of the floor. I mean, maybe even look at some things to establish how normal the room is. But it gets the job done, but doesn't get the heart going. Especially when you're writing horror, got to get the heart going. Another thing worth pointing out is that this screenplay is written specifically to the collaborators, the producers, the people who are working with him to make this film. And all the screenplays that I've read, and there's a lot now, I'd say about 60% of them are written for the reader, 30% are written for the viewer, and 10% are written for the collaborators. So what does that mean exactly? It means when you're describing a scene, who is this intended for? For most spec scripts, it usually is probably the best idea to intend it for the reader, because if it's not written to the reader, then it doesn't get past that stage. Because as screenwriters, we need to know who we're writing for and tailor the entire screenplay for that person. I'll give you an example here of what I'm talking about. Let's look at page 28. The car passes a telephone pole, just an average telephone pole, but we hold on it for a second longer than feels necessary. Hyper-attentive viewers might notice that a small sigil has been carved in it. Okay. So how do we know that he's talking to the collaborator here as opposed to the viewer or the reader? Because he's saying hyper-attentive viewers might notice. He's not saying you might notice. So he's not talking to you, the viewer. He's letting us in on it. Hey, when we make this film, when we put this together, the viewers may not notice this. This is important for them to not notice this, and maybe some do. That's fine. Don't worry about it. So if you were going to construct this action line for the viewers, you would say something like, something feels off. If you're paying attention, you might notice etched in the surface is a strange symbol. So see how I said there, if you're paying attention? So I'm talking to you, the viewer. So how is that different from the reader? Because if you were just writing this straight, like just for the reader, you would say something like, there's a strange symbol carved into the wood. It's a sigil. Easy to miss, but it's there. Because when we talk to the reader, we're letting them in on a little secret of what's going on. You would think it's the other way around, but it's not. The viewer is the coveted prize. They're the person we want to trick, the person we want to not know things or know things. The reader, we're letting them in on the secret of what's going on because they're going with us on this journey of the story. But the collaborator now we're building the Lego castle together and you need to know everything about this. Did that make sense? Of course it did. All right, let's talk about dialogue. Aster uses this emotional realism, this thematic layering. It's emotionally raw, it's uncomfortable. People don't just say what they mean. They never say what they mean until they do. Aster keeps his characters grounded. They always stay in the emotional reality of the scene. There's no show-off writing with dialogue. There's no cool one-liners or trying to be funny or cute. It is true to what is going on. Page 58, this is the golden calf of the screenplay as far as dialogue is concerned. This is the monologue where Annie goes off on Peter. This is where she would have earned her Oscar nomination in 2025. It's amazing writing. It's a beautiful performance, and here it is.
Don't you swear at me, you little shit! Don't you ever raise your voice at me! I am your mother! Do you understand? All I do is worry and slave and defend you, and all I get back is that fucking face on your face! So full of disdain and resentment and always so annoyed. Well, now your sister is dead, and I know you miss her. And I know it was an accident, and I know you're in pain, and I wish I could take that away for you. I wish I could shield you from the knowledge that you did what you did, but your sister is dead. She is gone forever. And what a waste. If it could have maybe brought us together or something. If you could have just said, I'm sorry, or faced up to what happened. Maybe then we could do something with this, but you can't take responsibility for anything. So now I can't accept, and I can't forgive, because nobody admits anything they've done.
We talked earlier about the slow burn nature of this film and something that's very popular now in modern prestige horror. Sometimes it's just walking around, looking in the room, thinking, building this tension. Sometimes it's the speed of which the actors bring to life these monologues, taking their time, really breathing life into it, being authentic and true to what the character would be saying in that situation, how they would be saying it, rather than just trying to get through it quickly so that the pace of the film continues. Okay, so there's a great example of that here on page 2122. This is Colette doing some more heavy lifting. So look at the words here on the page and how much space they take up, and imagine in your mind how long you think this would take. A pretty good amount of time, but not like a long, long time. I want you to watch this scene and see how she delivers these lines, and it's important as a screenwriter to think about these things as you're writing your screenplays. Also look at the slow push into her while she's talking. It's a beautiful camera movement, but it creates this anxiety and tension, and it also carries us along into her words so that we're not losing interest in what she has to say. It's signaling to our brain, even if we're not consciously knowing it at the time, that, hey, this is important. We're being brought into her personal space. He doesn't, ironically enough, depict that on the page. This is something I guess he and his cinematographer decided on when they were putting the shot sheets and everything together. So let's pay attention to those two things as we watch this scene.
My name's Annie.
I am Annie.
My mom died a week ago, so I'm just here for trying it. I have a lot of resistance to things like this, but I came to these a couple of years ago. Well, I was forced to come. And I guess it helped. So my mom was old, and she wasn't altogether there at the end. And we were pretty much estranged before that, so it really wasn't a huge blow. But I did love her. And she didn't have an easy life. She had DID, which became extreme at the end, and dementia. And my father died when I was a baby from starvation because he had psychotic depression. And he starved himself, which I'm sure was just as pleasant as it sounds. And then there's my brother. My older brother had schizophrenia. And when he was 16, he hanged himself in my mother's bedroom. And of course, his suicide note blamed her, accusing her of putting people inside him. So that was my mom's life. And then she lived in our house at the end, before hospice. We weren't even talking before that. I mean, we were, and then we weren't, and then we were. She's completely manipulative, until my husband finally enforced a no-contact rule, which lasted until I got pregnant with my daughter. I didn't let her anywhere near me when I had my son, which is why I gave her my daughter, who she immediately stabbed her hooks into. And I felt guilty again. When she got sick, not that she was really even my mom at the end, and not that she would ever feel guilty about anything.
Also, at times, he puts in a lot of effort in describing the scene so that we can all visualize it very carefully. Page 97 is a good example of this. This is when Annie goes back into Joan's apartment, and I won't read it, but you can just see there you have four paragraphs, three pretty big paragraphs, and this is all just describing what she's seeing in there. And look at all the all caps words. These are all significant things that we as the reader should pay attention to. So this screenplay speeds up, it slows down. And what makes his writing unique is that he uses grief as a core theme, not just a plot device. The screenplay doesn't just use grief in the background. It structures the horror around the disintegration of the family. Also the slow, deliberate, slow burn nature that we've been talking about. The symbolism and the foreshadowing that he uses is unique to this screenplay, how it's layered all the way through. Every character is dealing with their own emotional themes. Nearly every event in the screenplay has a dual meaning, the psychological and the supernatural, and then blurring those two. Maybe one of the most unique parts of this screenplay is how they kill off the apparent protagonist like right away. When you start watching this film or you're reading the screenplay, Charlie stands out to us as like, this is about Charlie, the little girl. And then she's gone. Well, she's not really gone, I guess. But what I think makes this screenplay truly unique is that there is minimal to no explanation of the supernatural. And this is something that if you're writing a horror screenplay and you're trying to get past gatekeepers or producers who are trying to help you make it better, they're going to be asking the question, why? What is this? What makes this work? How can the viewer clearly understand the supernatural elements so that they're not questioning it and they're able to stop and enjoy the film? These are fair questions. These are things that, as a screenwriter, you have to know. But there is such a thing as over-explaining and too much expository and getting bogged down in all the rules and the details of the supernatural. Ari Aster doesn't do that. All this weird stuff starts happening and you don't really understand why. You get a little bits and pieces here about the occult and the demon king, but still it's never really explained other than, you know, it's generational. It's people who did something and it caused an effect, and this is the effect. And that's enough for you to get the story and understand it. But you really have to have collaborators that trust you as a screenwriter or a filmmaker to allow you to make a movie like this where you're going to say, look, at the end, there's going to be some crazy stuff going on and it's all going to make sense. Everybody's going to be okay with it. But maybe you don't understand all the rules. As opposed to Midsommar, which I feel like was very clear about the rules of the supernatural in the world and why it was happening. Ari Aster were one of the true masters today, and here are how his words on the page look on the screen.
Come on, Peter. Let's just do it.
It's heartening to see so many strange new faces here today. I know my mom would be very touched and probably a little suspicious. My mother was a very secretive and private woman. It's Grandma. You know you were her favorite, right? Even when you were a little baby, she wouldn't let me feed you because she needed to feed you. She was a very difficult woman, which maybe explains me.
I recognize you from your mother.
What? Sometimes I swear I can feel them in the room. She had private rituals, private friends.
Gonna take care of me.
You don't think I'm gonna take care of you?
But when you die,
At the end.
And that is Hereditary by Ari Aster. And this slow burn elevated horror is a trendsetter, still influencing horror films 7 years later. You have a dollhouse and a treehouse and a demon king. Ari Aster, he writes family dramas and lets the grief do the jump scares. Please subscribe and comment and like and all of those things. And also you can find me on all the social media channels. I do my best to keep up there. You can find out what's going on with me at my website, jeff-parker.com. Please share me with your screenwriting friends and your filmmaking friends. But most of all, thank you for being here and watching this podcast, listening to this podcast. And I'll see you next time, right here on the Screenplay Lab.
thank you for watching my dad's podcast.